Hello everyone, and welcome back to Nico Bobiko. Last year, in early January, I created a list of different goals for my 2024 Railfan year. These varied from heritage unit goals, to unit train goals, to locations I wanted to visit. In this video, I'm going to go over each one, show whether I completed it or not, and then move on to the next. I completed a total of 52% of my goals, which I think is pretty good considering the difficulty of some of my goals. I'm going to go through the goals by category, so without further ado, let's get started. To begin the locomotive section, I'm just going to go down my list and name each one as I go. My first goal that we're going to go over is completion, specifically being seeing a Norfolk Southern patched BNSF-9. I added this later in the year as these didn't exist yet in January, but I was able to complete it pretty quickly. My next one is my first fail, that of which being seeing a Union Pacific Heritage unit. Next up, we have a completion with no technical proof, that being see a non-Kansas City Southern special unit. The one in question is KCS number 4009, which I saw from a bridge on a Norfolk Southern sand train. I do have the report I made if that helps. Next we have the big tackle of seeing all 20 Norfolk Southern Heritage units. I want to push the number 20 in there. If you know, you know. I have a photo or video of evidence of all but 8103, but again, I've got at least a report. We will go one by one. There we go, Illinois Terminal. I was almost Next was another failure, and it was to see a CPKC unit. One of these did come past Cleveland, but I was out of town chasing the big boy and it came in the middle of the night anyways. My next goal is to see a Florida East Coast unit. Now, not only did I complete it, I actually saw 425, the Breast Care Awareness Unit, from the Brightline. Next one is a big one for me, and it was to finally see the Union Pacific Big Boy. Before this year, I had never seen this specific one, so finally being able to catch it moving was absolutely amazing. My next goal was to see an Amtrak Dash 8, which was completed pretty quickly when I took an Amtrak in July, as they are everywhere in Chicago. Up next, I'm going to group all of these into one, as it was technically one of each of the Canadian national fallen flags, and I actually did pretty well because of specifically Gary, Indiana. There's the Bessemer in Lake Erie, the Grand Trunk Western, the Illinois Central, and the Elgin, Joliet, and Eastern. The only one I failed was a BC Rail, which is funny because they are the only ones of the listed that have a chance to pass Cleveland anymore. Up next we have another fail, and it was to see a Dash 9 Canadian cab. If you don't know what they are basically Dash 9s that were sold to Canadian National and BC Rail, except their cab is the famous 4-window Canadian cab. Next we have one that is kind of a partial. It was to see an ex-Southern Pacific. Now, when I made this, I meant one of the few AC 4400s that are still in Southern Pacific paint. I failed to catch one of those, but what I did get was a Cotton Belt GP60. While the Cotton Belt is not technically a Southern Pacific, it's close enough and that was vague enough. Next we have two fails in a row. They were to see a New Jersey Transit Heritage Unit and a Metro North Heritage Unit. I didn't even go to the correct part of New York this year for them, so I obviously did not catch them. Next we finally see a success, this one being C and Iowa Interstate. Again, like with the Florida East Coast, I actually managed to catch one of their special units, 516. Next one is one that I knew was difficult and it was probably impossible, but I threw it in there because why not? And it was to see all of the CSX Heritage units. Currently, I've caught 9 of the 21, so that's not that bad. Those include 1827, Alright guys, we're over here in Euclid, Ohio. We got the CSX 1850. 1852, 1853, 1899, 1967, 1973, 1976. Holy wow. And 1982. My next goal was to see a BNSF 25th anniversary unit. I failed, and still, through all these years, have somehow still not caught one. Next, similar to that, was to see a Santa Fe leader, which once again, I failed on. Next though, was a big success, and I was able to catch a Montana railing. Only one of these have come by Cleveland so far, but I was lucky enough to get them. Next was to see one of the Wheeling and Lake Erie Rio Grande units, which I failed on. I don't get to see the Wheeling too much, so it was a bit of a stretch. Next was to see a Metro Heritage unit. I actually managed to catch two of them, that being 211 and 425. Next was another completed Metro goal, which was seeing one of the new Metro Max. I saw one in Metro's Blue Island yard, so while not running, it was still a completion. But all good things must come to an end, and we have a Metro goal fail, which was seeing one of their Cowl units. Next was to see a Norfolk Southern Eco unit. For many, these are common, but we rarely see them in Cleveland. Next was to see a demonstrator unit. In August, I went to Erie, and while there, I stopped by the old Wabtec plant, where I managed to find a ton of demonstrator units. Next one was one I was fully expecting to fail, but I managed to not only complete it, but get a special scheme on him. That was seeing a Canadian National Standard Cab -8. The one I saw was in Canadian National's Homewood Yard, and it was in their 15th anniversary scheme. Also to note, there was the Canadian Cab -8 tipped on its side in Homewood for training. My next goal was a specific one, and to fail. It was to see the last C40-8 on the CSX roster, 9280. Next was to see a Ferromex, which I did manage to get. My next goal was to see one of the XCEFX patched NSAC 4400s. I managed to get one in each of the schemes that they had, that being the old CEFX, the Central Maine and Quebec scheme, and the new Bluebird scheme. Next was seeing one of the Canadian Pacific Veterans units, one of which I actually managed to get leading, that being the 7023, the Air Force unit. Next one was another stretch that actually panned out, and it was seeing a Kansas City Southern Grey Ghost leader. One of these popped up leading 315 early in the year, and as it was running on my local line, I of course had to get it. Next was seeing some sort of unit in transit. I saw a good amount of these this year, spanning from ex-Norfolk Southern B-32-8s to Canadian SD-50s to an Amtrak F-40. My next goal is one we technically already covered, but I made it more vague, and that being seeing any Dash 8. Obviously, the Canadian National got it for me, but I was not at all expecting to see it, so I threw this one in here. I did see a good amount at Wabtec as well. Next was to see a non-Norfolk Southerner BNSF-9. This seems strange, but being as those are the only two mainline railroads who really run them anymore, I threw it in. Second to last, we have one that should be easy, but I seem to struggle catching, and it's seeing all three of the CSX Pride units. These are 911, the First Responders Unit, 1776, the Military Unit, and 3194, the Law Enforcement Unit. I finally managed to catch 3194, and leading at that, but I've still not been able to catch 911, so this one will continue. Lastly, we'll end the locomotive group with a very basic one, and that is seeing a Kansas City Southern leader of any kind. I knew this would hit, but being as the year before I'd only ever seen one Kansas City Southern leader ever, in this section, I'm going to cover all the specific unit trains and interesting rolling stock I wanted to see, so let's go. First was to see some sort of geometry train. I managed to catch the Norfolk Southern geometry train, as well as a lot of the CSX geometry boxcars. My next one was to see a Sperry rail car, which I did not manage to do. My next one was a big one for me as I'd never seen one before, and it was to see an office car special. This year, I managed to not only catch one, but two office car specials, that being the CSX and the Norfolk Southern. Next, we have a ton of fails in a row, so I'm just going to fly through them. First was to see a full military train, then see a generator in transit, then a nuclear train, and then see a large power move, which I counted as a large move of 5 or more locomotives with no cars. Next we have one that didn't pan out like I expected, but it still ended up working out, and it was to see a caboose on the main line. I was expecting to likely see one of the Department of Defense cabooses in transit, but I actually managed to catch an old Norfolk and Western caboose on an Elkhart local. Next was to see a private car on Amtrak. These are always cool to see, but I almost never went out for Amtrak this year, so I did not catch any. Next is another passenger car fail, and that being seeing one on Class 1. What I meant here was seeing some sort of passenger car being treated as freight, but I only saw the Norfolk Southern Office Car Special and the CSX Office Car Special passengers this year. Lastly, we unfortunately end with a fail for this section, and it was to see some sort of construction equipment. For the slack section, I'm including all of the places that I wanted to go and the things I wanted to see. So let's get started. We'll start this section with a completion, and that being going to Larry's Truck and Electric, which is a large locomotive scrapyard. I like to go once a year to see what's new, and this year was no different. Next, I wanted to ride Amtrak. When I made this, I was expecting a fail, but later in the year I made 2 trips on Amtrak for railfanning, one to Elkhart, Indiana, and one to Chicago, Illinois. The first railfan location goal was to visit Northeast Pennsylvania and the Lakeshore Railway Museum. I hit this spot for a few minutes and managed to catch a very nice consist on CSX M363. Next we have our first fail in this category, and it was to visit the Reading and Blue Mountain Railroad. I wanted to see the Reading T1 running as we are restoring one here in Cleveland, but we just never found the time to get down there. Next is 2 CSX hotspot fails, that being visiting Cumberland, Maryland and Huntington, West Virginia. I was originally planning an Amtrak trip to Cumberland and planned to also chase the 1301, but due to it not running this summer, I decided to go elsewhere. Next we have another success, that being visiting Altoona, Pennsylvania, and more specifically, the Juni Auto Shops. My next goal was another long shot that did not hit, and it was to visit the old NRE site in Paducah, Kentucky. It is such a strange place that wherever I'm traveling, I just seem to never pass it, so I'll probably never end up going. Oh well. My last and final goal was unfortunately a fail. It was visiting the Mad River and Nickel Plate Road Railroad Museum in Bellevue, Ohio. It had been ages since I had been, and I went here a ton when I was a little kid, but unfortunately we never found the time, although I most definitely plan to go this year. So now, I have to create a 2025 list. The list for this year is definitely going to be more difficult to do, as I've taken most of my misses and added them, added some back, and complicated some completions even more. Like with the 2024 section, I'm going to go with them by category. To start off the locomotive section, I want to finish the Norfolk Southern Heritage Fleet by getting 4851. Next is a long shot, but why not, and it's to get all of the 21 CSX Heritage units. Next is a lot of continuations, and it is to get all of the 3 CSX Pride units. Then there's getting a Union Pacific Heritage unit, then a CPKC unit, then I want to see specifically a Florida East Coast GEVO in their older scheme. I'm complicating the Amtrak Dash 8 by wanting to see one lead. Then I'm going to bring it back with all the Canadian National Fallen Flags, that being the BLE, the IC, the GTW, the B-Call, and the EJE. Next, we're running the Canadian Cab Dash 9 back. Now this time for the Southern Pacific, I'm going to be more specific. This time, I want to specifically see one of their AC 4400s. I'm adding back the New Jersey Transit and Metro North special units, as well as the Canadian National Heritage units. And I'm making a new Canadian National goal of seeing an ex-City Rail leader. I want to see one less Thoroughbred Dash 9. I'm adding back the BNSF 25th anniversary, as well as the Santa Fe leader. I want any kind of BNSF MAC leader, Executive, H2, or H3. I want to get the Wheeling and Lake Erie 6348, which is the former EMD leaser locomotive. I'm adding back a bunch of Metro goals, but more complicated, starting with seeing a Metro Heritage unit, not including 211 because I've seen him a ton. I want to see a Metro MAC leader, and I'm adding the Cowell unit back again. I'm also adding back the Norfolk Southern Eco unit, as well as a demonstrator unit. I'm going to be slightly less specific on this by adding any kind of Canadian National Dash 8. I want specifically an older paint Ferromex Givo. I want a Kansas City Southern Grey Ghost leader in the daylight. I want an Amtrak P40 DC leader. I'm going to add back the ND-8 again, as in the likely scenario that the Canadian National one does not pan out. I again want a non-Norfolk Southern or BNSF-9. I'd like to get one of the CSX Nose Vandal units. I want a Canadian National SD75I Duo. I once again want a Montana Rail Link. I'd like a Union Pacific SD70M leader. I'd like a BNSF H1 leader. And lastly, to end off the locomotives, I'd like a Norfolk Southern High Hood leading. Now for the rolling stock section, I'm going to start off by wanting the office car special again. I'm going to add back the geometry train. The Sperry rail car. The full military train. The generator and nuclear trains. The caboose on the main line. And lastly, both of my passenger car goals on Amtrak and freight. Lastly, for trips, I'm going to keep this section short this year. I'm going to start off with a Florida-Georgia trip, which is referring to a specific trip I have in the works with a group of friends that's going to include the Florida East Coast in Jacksonville and the CSX in Folkston and Waycross, Georgia. Next, I'd like to visit Pine Junction in Gary, Indiana. I'd like to actually make my visit to the Mad River Nickel Plate Road Museum. I'd like to ride the Amtrak again. I want to go chase the Canadian National Conneaut ore trains. And lastly, I want to chase two Genesee and Wyoming railroads, the Ohio Central and the Indiana and Ohio, or the Chicago, Fort Wayne, and Eastern. Overall, I hope to hit maybe 25% of these because there are some very difficult catches in here. Last year treated me very well, and I really do hope that this year treats me even better. I finally have my license, so that should definitely help. But now, with that, I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.